Well, today is March 19th, 2019. I'm Marguerite Gong Hancock from the Exponential Center at the Computer History Museum, and we're thrilled to be here with Steve Chen. Steve, so great to have you here, and welcome for your oral history.
Great. No, looking forward to this. Been looking forward to it for, I think, now over 10 years, 15 years since YouTube started. I've been keen about actually giving the entire history of what we've built.
Well, it's so important, and here at the museum, we are grateful for the opportunity to capture your story and to help people understand and to receive some inspiration about where you've gone from early influences to your idea to impact that's really changed the world. So let's start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. For the record, can you tell us your full name and where you were born, and what was life like for you in the home that you were raised in?
Sure. So I was born outside of the U.S., right? I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, 1978, and so that marks me as being 40 years old as of now.
Congratulations.
Well, I'm actually glad that I'm finally 40, because I think that we'll get to it. But when we started YouTube, I was in my 20s, and all the interviewers were in their 40s, and it was always a generational gap between the questions and the answers that I would give. So, I think that I have a much better idea, context of what YouTube has begun. No, so I was born in Taiwan. I came to the U.S., but it was not the Bay Area. It was Chicago. And it wasn't a decision by me, it was a decision by my parents, right? I think that there was an opportunity for my father to open a branch of his office in Chicago, and I think he took it in part as a career development decision, but I think a large part in influencing his decision was to give his two kids, myself and my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, this sort of American dream, this opportunity to be able to do something in America, right? At the time, no idea. At the time, it was flying on United Airlines and not knowing the English words to ask the question, can I have some additional water? Where's the bathroom? But landing in, I still remember sort of landing in O'Hare Airport there in Chicago, and even then, I don't remember much when I was 8 years old, but I do remember touching down and having these expectations, having never been in the U.S. before, about what the U.S. was going to look like as opposed to where I grew up in Taiwan.
And how have those been shaped, those expectations? From media, from stories, from your parents talking to you?
I want to say that when I was growing up, there were always stories and tales, and I think they were exaggerated to a degree, to the point where when I landed, I was slightly disappointed at what I saw. This whole vision of a dreamland being equivalent to the most grand visions that you have coming and appearing in your dreams. It wasn't quite that in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. But I think that it started, I think that it gave me the opportunity to be able to feel like I'm finally sort of having a little bit more control in the direction of the steps I want to take. And that's at an early age, but I think that that's where it first started, and it grew over the years. And in many ways, I think that true to the sentiments and the decision-making of my parents, that is the first step and what led me to what I am today.
Interesting. So this proactive sense of making a conscious decision for your family to move to a new place, a new land, pursue new opportunities, you feel like that led to you being, would you say, characterize that as a risk-taking or exploring? Say a little bit more about how that early decision really shaped you. Not only where you lived and your school you went to, but these sort of deeper attributes. Can you say more?
Yeah, so I mean, I think again, putting myself back in that mindset of an 8-year-old, it's difficult to at that present, if that was the present moment, it's difficult for an 8-year-old to understand this sort of great contextual vision of what third grade is going to do to the rest of his life. Um, However, looking back upon it, um, during those days of sort of uh, just putting it myself into a completely different environment, right? Not understanding, you know, not understanding even the language of what people were speaking around you, not understanding. I mean, all every minute of a 24-hour day out of the 7 days in a week was completely different from what I had seen 7 years prior, and so. I think starting from that moment, there's a bit of fear, a sort of I think a required, just self-enforced aggressive education as to. Luckily, I had my brother with me, so it wasn't just me by myself alone going through this journey. But it quickly became, I think you learn a language really quickly. You adapt to new social environments very quickly at that age. And so in a very quick period, I'm going to measure it in mere months, we became sort of grounded in our new home. Home, probably for the first few months, was still Taiwan, but over the course of a few months, it gradually became US. It became Chicago. You start over that period, instead of your favorite foods being foods from Taiwan, it became Chicago-style hot dogs and deep dish pizza, And so that very quickly became where I think I would say now where I grew up was really Chicago, Illinois.
So this was Prospect Heights, is that right?
That's right.
And
right.
can you just describe, so you're there in third grade, what was what was that like for you, the school? What were your kind of early passions? You're making this incredible change in language and culture and context. And what kinds of things at that age, besides making a change, were you interested in as you finished your elementary school?
Well, I think at that, because there was, I think, two parallel sort of journeys that I was taking to be able to fully integrate myself. There was one which is just learning English, right? And so, there was a considerable part of a daily class, a considerable part of the day that was focused on just learning English. And then there was everything else around it. And everything else around it was truly just everything else around it was a mystery. But over a period of time, you start to understand what is going on in the other minutes, the other hours of the day, what is going on with the sort of social environment with the other kids in the class, with the actual teachers. And so during that period, for the first few months, it was really being able to immerse myself in the environment. But I think quickly thereafter, I started to, it's far before, computers or anything of that sort, but I think it was, there was a bit of kind of encouragement to just, kind of explore a bit. I think there's once, school lets out, you go home, you're in the Midwest, there's not, growing up in Taipei versus moving to sort of the suburbs of the Midwest, there's a big difference, not just with language and sort of social context, but there's a big difference in just what you do, the activities that you do, or the lack of activities that you do during that period. And so I think that...
Could you give a few examples just to help bring that to life of the context of Taipei versus Prospect Heights? What were some of those things that were so different?
I think that growing up in Taipei, and I think, again, in that environment, it was a little bit more rigid in terms of what is happening throughout the periods of the day. There's the school, but more importantly, it's what happens at 3:30 and 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Whereas I recall when I was growing up in Prospect Heights, once school lets out and you get off that bus, it's pretty much from 3 p.m. until dinner time. That was just completely open to whatever you wanted to do, and I think that given that liberty to be able to do whatever you want to do, it does take a little bit of creativity to just find what there is to do. And so instead of it being a scheduled calendar where everything has already been pre-decided and not by you, by somebody else that's already filling your calendar, all of a sudden you're in a situation where you are deciding what you want to do. And part of that, I think, is part of that experience led me to kind of self-educate. What are the things that I like doing? What are the things that I don't like doing? Decisions that I think are good decisions, bad decisions. And so it was everything from running around the creek that we were living in the Midwest, jumping across with ropes and catching crayfish, and there was just things that, even if I had dreamed of it, would not have been possible in Taipei. And so in a lot of ways, I do think that I benefited from being able to see both sides of it. I think that the only way that I can, recognize what I had differently in the Midwest is to have grown up and to have lived and born in Taipei to be able to see the difference.
That's so interesting to think about the before and after change. Let's move forward to the time when you moved to a new school with a focus on math. Is that right? The Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy?
That's right.
Can you talk about the decision, yours or your family? How did that decision get made? And then what did that mean for you?
Sure. And so I think leading up to it, the confession is that being born within this sort of umbrella of an Asian family with specifically with a very traditional Asian mother, there was a bit of sort of enforcing on her part for both my brother and me to spend extracurricular time on sort of educating ourselves in doing math, in reading, in doing science. And so I think that it through that period there was a lot of pressure to be doing this, and not necessarily out of our own volition, but my mother's. Starting from freshman year in high school, you start applying for this Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. And at the time leading up to that, when I was 15 years old, because of this environment at home, it was almost without thought, I just excelled in math, in sciences. And so I just thought that it was a fit environment for me to be able to kind of pursue these passions in the scientific verticals. And so I applied to IMSA as soon as I learned about it. When I entered IMSA, it's a dormitory. I mean, it's a boarding school, so it's the first time where I'm living without having parents home, and just having peers of my own age around. And I think it was the first time where, regardless of what my mother or my father wanted me to do, I was completely the decision maker. And so leading up to that time, I knew what they wanted me to do, but it's the first time where I get to literally just I don't want to do it, or I want to do it. And I remember that it was IMSA that really transformed, I think, my perspective on science. For the first few months at IMSA, I really didn't do anything at all. I think that it was the first time where I could go home and I could choose not to do anything that I had been doing for years leading up to it. And so I didn't attend class. I didn't do homework. I didn't do any of the things that that I think leading up to that point I was supposed to be doing. But I think what helped was that context and environment, right? And so I think that leading up to it, I was always the sort of the excelled in the class and was always ranked number one when it came to the sciences. All of a sudden, when you enter IMSA, you drop down to, the bottom quartile, right? But it was.
Was it that dramatic, or are you just being?
Well, partially because I didn't do anything either. But it's. I think that it's the first time where I think you're in an immersed environment where it's the top 1, 2, 3 students from every school in Illinois all meeting up there. But I think during those years was where I learned that I really did have a passion for the sciences, right? And especially when it came to computers. This was in about 1992, 93, and was lucky enough to be at IMSA where there was a strong focus on the sciences. And as part of that, they gave these 15-year-olds, these 16-year-olds, access to the internet for the first time. And so I think being in that environment, I learned that even without the prodding of my parents, I actually enjoyed doing this. It took a few months and probably throughout my entire sophomore year where I thought I was first just liberated from whatever my parents wanted me to do. But through that period, I found out that, I actually enjoyed doing this myself.
Was it a gradual realization about this personal passion, or was it something, or was there a particular moment, a galvanizing moment or a person or a situation where you thought, aha, this is it? What was your experience?
I think it differentiated across the spectrum. When it came to computers, I just had a real interest in it from the very beginning, and it developed over the period of time. And all of a sudden, you're handed a computer that had full access to the internet.
What computer was it? What make and model? Do you remember?
It was at the time, it was one of these 386 computers, Intel 386 computers, and it was no longer parents around to say, it's time to get off this computer. It's time to do this and that. At that time, in a way, I could decide exactly what I wanted to do, and so it was during that time when I started learning what the internet was. It was during that time when I started interacting with other people just across the world. It was that time where I started to play around with Linux for the first time, and so I think that through that period, one is just being able to fully explore whatever I wanted to explore and experiment around with computers, and two, I think realizing that if I really did have the full openness to be able to do whatever I wanted, I do think that I would pursue something in the sort of this area of computers, this area of being able to create something with computers, and I think that that has always been the period where I started really programming for the first time, and I kind of learned that you're able to almost create something that wasn't there hours ago, and then you can, hours later, whatever you thought, whatever your imagination thought up just through typing on a keyboard, hours later, you would have whatever your imagination conjured up, you would have an actual real working version of that. And so I think throughout that period, learned that I liked doing this, and then learned how to actually do it.
What were, so you mentioned Linux, what languages were you using? What were some of the things that you were playing with, the programs that you were doing in those early years, sophomore or junior year at IMSA?
Yes, what was it? It was a Linux distribution. It was Slackware at the time. I forget what version of Linux it was. But I was lucky enough to, one, have access to a computer, two, not having governing parents behind me to tell me the hours, three, having access to the internet far before it expanded to what it is today. But I also think that, again, timing-wise, there was this explosion of open source software. And so during that period, you're able to see how these programs that you regularly use, how it was built, and how it was built around a community of people around the world contributing to it. And so I think when you put all those pieces together, if you have an interest in computers, that was probably the ideal time, the earliest time to be able to fully kind of have all of that be able to be tangible inside a dormitory room of a 15-year-old with just a computer.
It's amazing. I'm getting a sense of sort of this incredible opening up and liberation, this freedom of exploration that you had, and you're at the same time this opening, this honing in on something that has become this lifelong passion. So what's next? You have this passion, and you just look ahead to, were there other important influences for you during that time at IMSA, or that you want to mention before we get to college?
I think those IMSA days were helpful, right? Because I think that those IMSA days made it so it kind of it gave me the I think the confidence to be able to go out and try something and really dive into it. I think that without my parents around, and being able to just choose my own hours as electives at an early age in high school, and being able to do whatever I wanted to do at night, stay up to however late I want to stay up, drink as much coffee as I want to drink, it allowed me to really be able to, I think more than other 15-year-olds, I was passionate about computers, and I was able to just do whatever I wanted with computers. And I think the reward there, albeit on a very small level, is to be able to say, look, if I have interest in this, I can pour whatever amount of energy I want into it, and then be able to see what what the results of that were. And especially with computers during that time, I mean, the computers were just fast enough where if you really had an idea for something, and if you really want to do it, it's not like many other disciplines in arts where if you had an idea for something, with computers, within hours, you can see whether or not that actually blossomed into something useful or something that failed. And you can do that every day. You can do that anytime you wanted. And without having to answer to almost any of the other, I think, demands that usually would be enforced on a 15-year-old, I was just able to play and tinker around and learn what I thought I enjoyed, and tinker around with what was out there that I could access on the entire internet at the time.
So you had this incredible world at your fingertips, literally, as you're looking at exploring the internet. Were there particular people or communities or programs or companies that caught your eye that you kind of experimented with that were important during that time, or was it just sort of a free exploration of a lot of things?
I think it was mostly at that time. I think the internet was, I wouldn't even say the wild wild west. I mean, it was just
It's so early.
yeah, I wouldn't even say we didn't even know if the West was wild or not back then. You know, it was just completely wide open, and so it was a lot of but up until that time, it was always a personal computer was a personal computer. There was never this idea that this personal computer could be attached to other personal computers. It you know the As much as a chat room is just text, or maybe if you're lucky, it's colored text, but that's it. There are no if there's nothing but that. There's no sound, there's no images, nothing visual, surely no videos. But that was still more exciting than it. I think it gave us this idea that, like, with this computer and with the beginnings of these protocols to be able to communicate with others, it allowed you to be able to, interact with someone that's hundreds or thousands of miles away. And really, up until that time, that was not really possible. To be able to engage with 20 people that are posting, that are talking, that are chatting from all over the world. And so, kind of abstractly taking away the actual what we were doing, the abstraction is that, like, for the first time, you're able to interact with different people at the same time. And I think that, to me, that's where it started growing in people, with the vision to see where this could become as the computers became more powerful, as the processor became more powerful, and especially as internet speeds became more powerful. You can just build on top of that more and more sort of uses for that connectivity.
With that exciting vision, which has proven to be world-changing, you had this passion that you then pursued in college.
Right.
Can you
right.
talk about how you made the decision on your next step, on where you went to college, and
Yeah, so I went to school at so quickly as grew up in the northwest suburbs of Illinois, and then the Illinois Math and Science Academy was in Aurora, Illinois, so it was about a 45-minute drive from where I lived, and then the next step for me was in the area of engineering, and the luck for me was that the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign had one of the best departments for computer science, departments for engineering. And in fact, it was one of the earlier schools that had an entire department for computer science. But I think that putting myself back into the shoes of a senior applying for a school, I just knew that I personally liked playing around and tinkering around with computers. And at IMSA, luckily, I had the ability to be able to pursue that further and to find more people than I would probably in a regular school, not a school focused on math and science, to find peers that also had the passion for computers. But it still was not something that was, I think, seen in the actual high school curriculums. So there wasn't a formal path to take. If you're interested in the internet, if you're interested in interacting with others around the world, that you take these classes to pursue that further. So a lot of that was still done just in my own free time. And so when I started going to apply for Champaign-Urbana, I knew that it was something in engineering, and so there was computer engineering, computer science, and electrical engineering. I really didn't know what my formal major would have been. I just knew that there was a great program with a lot of resources, with great professors and great peers. And so I want to say that I randomly chose between computer science, computer engineering, electrical engineering. I just checked a box. And, looking back, that was probably a lucky check that it ended up being computer science. I just figured if the major had the word computer in it, what was the difference between computer engineering and computer science? And just the entire umbrella of engineering. What is the real difference? And it was only after I got to University of Illinois when I realized the difference between the different the studies of the engineering, and so I learned that computer science was very much on the, of course, there's education and understanding of what's in the hardware behind it, but the focus is software, is program, is development, is building something, and it's exactly in line with what I've always liked to do in my own personal time, but now, for the first time, it's formalized. For the first time, I'm able to not just having to explore and find this and hack this to understand it, but now there are actual real classes to be able to, sort of formally teach me what's behind a network, formally teach me what defines, artificial intelligence, and the actual, everything from algorithms and how to really write the programs correctly versus incorrectly, how to optimize for what I'm doing. And so I think that luckily I chose computer science, and during those first few years at at U of I, it really opened up my eyes to what's possible and what I can create.
Any professors or classmates that were particularly influential for you during those years at UOI?
I think in a way, no, none of the professors come to mind, but in the talks I give, I am always slow in confessing this. I never really went to class when I was at the university, but the study that I was in, I mean, computer science, you're given, you have the computer to be able to, so let's say a programming class, and the assignment for the programming class is write in this language an algorithm or program that is optimized to do this task, to perform this algorithm. And you have the internet, you have books, you have a keyboard, you have a screen. You can do whatever you want, and you can play around with it. I think it's very different, computer science, from other engineering departments, other engineering studies, in that I've always sort of associated computer science to be the closest to, in a way, completely different department, completely different college, but the sort of the literary side of creating and writing, and that, there are multiple ways to be able to get the same results when it comes to programming, and some would be the ones that, as a new programmer, it's obvious that this is what you would do. And it's not optimized, and there's a lot of lines of code. But then as you gradually get better at it, and as you look at, for example, the open source code that's behind Linux, that's behind Emacs, that's behind some of these programs, you're kind of befuddled when you first look at it. Like, you see what it can do, but you have no idea what these lines of code actually do to be able to achieve and accomplish this. And so, and there's so many ways to be able to do the same thing. There are practically infinite ways to write this code to be able to achieve these results. And as you get better and better, you start really appreciating. So the easy ways to be able to accomplish that same problem with a solution, you understand it right away, but it's far from the as you start getting better at this and you start understanding, it takes a lot more time to understand these the 4 lines and 5 lines of code that's being able to do the same things as 20, 30, 40 lines of code. And it takes a long time to be able to understand it. But when you do, this spark, this light bulb goes off, and it's almost this sort of this self-celebrated congratulation to be able to say that is beautiful. That is in a way like engineering art, that you could actually do this with these lines of code. But I think that you don't learn that necessarily in class. I think that a lot of that is self-exploration again, and you do that if you have a passion for it. You do that with your own computer. You learn that online, and again, luckily, those resources were available, all from just again a computer, a keyboard, and an internet connection.
So many people have written or talked about this extraordinary gift or skill that you have to have elegant, artful, efficient, code. And some people spend time and that's not their particular gift. Can you describe for people who are trying to understand how that works, how you get to that kind of, as you called it, this art, can you describe a little bit of the thought process, how that evolves for you? How would you describe that process that you go through to, as you say, that to understand the 4 or 5 or to create the 4 or 5 lines versus the 20? What's going on in your mind? How are you approaching that? What's if we could see inside your brain?
Well, I think that the problems that you're trying to solve are typically something that you can easily understand. And there's a huge spectrum of just everything from networks and artificial intelligence. But as simple as just sorting 1,000 numbers. How do you actually sort that in a way that's optimized in the shortest amount of time possible and using the least amount of memory, least amount of CPU? And there are very easy ways to do it, and then there are very elegant ways to do it. In fact, there are PhD papers on how to do this. And I think it's one thing to be doing it yourself, but when I look at something like, I think one of the best examples was looking at Linus Torvalds with the Linux operating system. And all of a sudden you have something here where it's different from Microsoft DOS or Windows at the time or Mac at the time. Here's an operating system that was written completely open source by people around the world. And not just written once, but it's continually updated, right? And so you look at something like how this operating system interacts over the network, how it communicates with the internet, and you see the entire version history of this was the first version, this is the second version, and every version there's always a sort of commentary as to why we did this, why it was approved, or why it was rejected. And so you see this long history of how it got to the version that it is today from what it was years ago, and in between that period, all the different contributors and all the people that are looking over this and not looking over this. And so I think, again, that was a very great time to be getting into the programming side of things. I think that was sort of this beginning of this sort of golden era in computer programming, in computer science, because up until that time, there wasn't that collaboration between different software engineers around the world trying to achieve the same goal, trying to solve the same identical problem, and they're all helping each other. They're not competing with one another. There's no conflict of interest.
I'd like to now talk about when you decided to leave school, and how did you make that decision to, leave school and jump to a new opportunity, a company working at?
So this is in 1999, and I was a senior in college. In fact, I was a senior in my second semester, leading up to my second semester in college. So, roughly 6 months away from receiving the diploma.
So close to the formal finish of the degree.
And, I think that if I had to list probably one of the sort of riskiest decisions that I've ever made, but I think that it's characteristic of, I think, just entrepreneurs. I mean, not just entrepreneurs starting a company. Of course, that is the I think the largest demonstration of it. But I think as we move forward, the decisions that we made and the corrections that we made, the changes in what we decided to do when it comes to just about everything from the YouTube level down to every one of the features that we were writing for YouTube. I made this decision that, look, I think from the outside, it looks like it was a complete rash decision, because it really was made in 3 days that I decided to leave school and leave the state and fly across on a one-way ticket to the Bay Area. But at the time, it was, look, you take this leave of absence from school, of which any time you can return back to school, to the after receiving the diploma, it was going to be working in the Midwest. And in the Midwest, there are many large companies out there. Motorola is would have been one of the primary choices if I were to graduate from U of I in the year 2000 to go work for Motorola. But, I think that at the time it was always, I can always do this at any time, sort of from a chronological perspective on things. It was always, if anything failed, I can always return to this, whether or not that's in 1999, a month after I depart, 2000, 2001. But this opportunity came along where a couple friends of mine from the Math and Science Academy, from the Champaign-Urbana, that also was in the computer science department, they reached out to me and said, we're in Silicon Valley, and we have started working on a startup called Confinity at the time. And the co-founder of this company, Max Levchin, is also from Champaign-Urbana, is also from Illinois, and he's looking for new engineers for this startup. And being from Illinois and having almost newly moved out, Max moved out to the Bay Area. Max didn't know the sort of the engineers in computer science out here in the Bay Area, and so he made the connection back to where he had a lot of sort of just a lot of connections with the school back in the Midwest. And so I got this.
Did he call you, or when you say he reached out, how did he contact
you? We did
you?
I was first called by one of the engineers that was there, but I remember doing this interview with Max over ICQ.
Okay.
So this was in 1999. ICQ was, I think, the instant messaging app at the time, and so I never even heard his voice during this interview. It was just typing questions and answers and questions and answers, and the interview was concluded by when can you come out here, and so it. There was really no hesitation on my part to be able to do this. I think, again, it was I really did calculate that if this didn't work out, I would be able to return to whatever I was doing. But it's hitting a pause on that and saying, if this opportunity exists, it's not going to always exist. And so if this window, I don't take it now, it's going to close at some point. And so I just thought, it is the logical, reasonable thing to do to be able to hit a pause, drop everything that I'm doing here as quickly as I can, fly out to Silicon Valley, and pursue this and see what happens. And so, within 3 days after that ICQ chat session ended, I was on a one-way flight out to Silicon Valley from Chicago.
So you had this chat session with Max, and what was so compelling to you? What was so enticing about Confinity or about working with Max or the team? What did you perceive at that time that you were pursuing?
I think it's akin to when I was moving out to Chicago for the first time, and this land of opportunity. And when I was looking at Silicon Valley, it was Silicon Valley. I've only read about it. I didn't, so I really thought somehow the valleys were made out of silicon. And I knew that it was the birthplace for all the technologies that I use and I've heard of. But I didn't really know what it was like here. And what brought me out was to be able to see this firsthand. And I thought it was the right decision. I thought it was the logical thing to do to be able to see this, but I really didn't know what was gonna be here. I remember landing in SFO and driving down 101 at the time, and just seeing, Oracle or sort of Sun Microsystems, and to be able to see that compressed number of companies all compressed onto that short 30-minute drive from San Francisco to Palo Alto, that was unheard of. All the software that I used, it just happened to be in this 30-minute drive. And so I didn't really know what to expect, but it was eye-opening to be able to make that drive and to be able to see all these companies, the headquarters of all these companies, in that short period.
That's an amazing illustration of your first arrival. Day one on the job, do you remember? Or the first month, let's say. What was your role? What were you working on? Who were you working with?
It was November 22nd of 1999. Although I think that the first day on the job was actually on a Sunday, and I think that's a good introduction to Sundays, Saturdays, and weekdays don't make any difference, I think, in Silicon Valley. And it wasn't so much work. It was, one, an introduction to the rest of the team, but two, you walk in and it's at the time was 4 engineers, but it seemed like they were playing video games, they were playing board games, talking, eating, and in a way that I knew that I went to the office that I was supposed to be working at. I walked in, there were desks, there were offices, but it's not in the traditional style of an office where you go in and it's 9 a.m., you start working, and 5 p.m. you leave. It was almost all the hobbies of the engineers and the staff. They were doing it at the office rather than at home. But it was on a Sunday, and that was also the first day where I was in the building of Confinity, where I met who eventually became the co-founder of YouTube, Chad Hurley, and he was the at the time he was the designer for everything under Confinity and what eventually became PayPal. And so he worked with all the engineers that was at PayPal. But I think it's a big change from what I expected. I had done internships at larger companies in the Midwest, and they're just large teams, and you are one member that's reporting to maybe a manager that reports to a director that reports into sort of VP and so on. And it never felt like, sure, you have the responsibilities, you are held accountable if you don't deliver on those, but I think when you're working with a much smaller team of just a company that's less than 20 people with an engineering team that's less than 6 people, you realize that it requires all 6 people working to be able to build, to launch, to maintain, and to update this product. And if there's not enough collaboration, if there's not a lot of communication, or if one person drops the ball, there's not a reliable backup to be able to take his place. So I don't think there were sick days. I don't think there were really weekends. There was no 5 p.m. checkout period, and I think that was a big difference between what it was like to be working for a larger company with longer timelines and a much larger engineering team than a startup here in Silicon Valley. But it was a great experience for me. I think that I was learning a lot of things that I hadn't learned before. PayPal at the time was an application for the Palm Pilot, and there was a web version of the product, and PayPal was a way to be able to transfer cash between a person to another person, and it's a complicated enough product that there's all the layers that's required to build an application, an internet application, were applicable to having to build PayPal. So everything from this, what's actually shown, the presentation tiered to the actual users, and so what that process is like to type in, to register, to type in somebody else's email address, to be able to add your bank account, your credit card account, to be able to transmit the cash, and to do it in a way that it's easy to be able to sign up. It's easy to be able to type in an email address, and then all the way down to, what if this email address isn't an email address that's valid? What if this bank account is an invalid ACH number? And so there's a lot of checks that goes all the way in, and then all the way down to the database layer, where when a transaction goes through, be able to insert that row in the database. All of that was completely new to me. We never learned how to do that in the sort of computer science at U of I, and so it was a very educational experience for me to be able to do that. And you're basically put on the ground with a full live version of the product, and you're working with people's cash, of all things.
Of all things, there's something real at stake here.
Yeah. But it was I think that during that, what was I? Was 20 years old at the time. I couldn't have asked for anything better. I was probably spending, 80, 90 hours there in the office. It was I think it was breakfast, lunch, dinner, always at the office. And just at that time, there were so many things. I think I didn't have any money in my bank account. I think I had a credit card that had a limit of $600, of which that was, I don't think you get paid for the first 2 weeks, and so I was having round table pizza, every day. I was still, I was very much still a college student at that time. I was still,
Where were you? What was your living situation? Just having arrived.
um, it was on the floor with a sleeping bag, but I mean, I didn't even have change of clothes because I flew out so quickly that I asked my roommates back in Champaign-Urbana to pack up the suitcase to ship it out. And so I don't remember how long that took to ship out, but there were certainly days where there's no change of clothes. Uh, uh, there, yeah, just the only thing I had were credit cards. I had a sleeping bag, and it almost didn't matter because it was just all my time was spent in the office, and so it was the sleeping bag. It served what it needed to serve. I just needed to sleep in it. Otherwise, I never spent time home. I remember it was a large living room area, but it didn't even have furniture. All it was a sleeping bag in the middle of that room, and I couldn't afford living in my own apartment at the time. I had to live with two of my friends that came from the Math and Science Academy that came from Champaign-Urbana, and the it was I think everything. I mean, I think I was still uh, like like smoking cigarettes all the time back then. I was still it was it's a bunch of 20-year-olds trying to build this payment service that's supposed to be the global payment service of the world, and yet they're 20-year-olds at heart, and so you're playing computer games after you're done just 2 hours earlier interacting with global payment services. You are doing these things of like making sure that the transactions in the database is always written and there's no flaw in the transactions. But then, you're drinking and smoking the in between this work, and it was just, I think, it was so different from anything that I had ever done before, and I think that it's also different from just about anywhere else in the world to be in this startup experience, being sort of directly from college or a 20-year-old at the time.
What were you've mentioned a few of them, but what were some of the kind of thorniest problems that you were dealing with during those early days for PayPal? You had the technical part, you had the customers, you had scaling and growth. What were the things that were really pressing for you that you were working on?
I think that any small company, and PayPal at the time, there was a QA department, which is comprised of one person, right? There's a design department that's comprised of one person. The largest department there was the engineering, and it had 6 people in it. And so I think all throughout that time, it was just everyone was kind of accountable for the entire product in a lot of ways, and so you're looking at different things and you're just making sure that everything works out, and you have to be kind of responsible for making sure that what you're building is going to work, and you are going to be the one that fixes everything. You're going to be the one that monitors everything that goes out. So during those early days, there was a lot of building out a lot of these features and building out the core of what became PayPal. But there was a lot of collaboration involved, and so I think that was probably the biggest thing learned during that period, was that I think in order to build out a startup when you have just a few engineers on board, there's no formal title attached to each of the engineers to say that you're responsible and only responsible for this part of the application, the website. Everybody's kind of responsible for looking at everything, and I think that throughout those few years, the everything kind of grew in a synchronized fashion, and so the company grew larger, the QA department grew larger, the design department grew larger, um, and the features became more complicated, but at the same time, it was still so maybe I think an example of that would be um, uh, maybe the shopping cart that we created for PayPal, or ultimately a big thing was sort of localization, internationalizing the actual product. So it's not just U.S. dollars anymore, but you can send transactions using euros, and just translating the actual product so it can be rendered in different languages. And still, these these products are much more complicated than what we had started in 1999, but always throughout that period, because it was still always a very lean, especially going through this dot-com crash in 99, 2000, 2001, it was still a very lean company, such that it always still felt like you were responsible for this entire feature, this entire development. And so I had a great time there at PayPal in the early days of being able to be able to work on this entire spectrum of sort of features for this website. But I should say that I think as the years wore on, so from 99, 2000, 2001 to even 2004, 2005, when I ultimately left PayPal, the company itself went through a number of very transforming phases. So it was fairly easy to raise capital back in 1999, but starting from 2000 and especially 2001, there was dot-com crash. And so at the time, PayPal was giving anybody that signed up. I mean, you just had to type in your email address, a password, confirm your email address, and it would write you a $10 check. You would have $10. Anybody that you referred, so you send a referral email to anyone that you wanted. If whoever you referred signed up and registered, they would get $10 and you would get $10. In a way, it was great for getting new users, but I mean, it was just burning up. You're paying $10 and potentially $20
for new
for
customers. Yeah.
and once you stop that, you're not going to get any new users. And of course, when it came to 2000, 2001, that had to be suspended. And what eventually ended up happening was, sure, you still get that $10, but in order to receive those $10, you have to add a credit card, you have to add your bank account, you have to confirm your bank account. Then it started getting the $10. And so it was no longer just a confirmed email address, but it was getting somebody's financial information to be able to transfer cash. But I think that as the company grew both through that phase and then I think ultimately going IPO itself, getting acquired by eBay, there was a large phase of it where it was competing with eBay. Where I think the most obvious use for PayPal at the time was for an eBay transaction. So after the auction closed, the buyer has to send the seller cash, and so PayPal was the ideal case for that. It was the best P2P payment service out there, and after the auction closed, the buyer would log into PayPal and send this cash out. And PayPal tried to create features that made it easier for that. So when you actually posted an eBay listing, there would be a button at the bottom to say pay. There would be a little link that would be the payment link. And it was always this kind of battle between eBay wants to take that off. eBay wants to find a way to be able to create their own payment service. eBay tried to prevent PayPal from putting in these payment buttons, and PayPal was always trying to find another way to be able to get around that. And there are so many things that we learned. There's so many parallels between what we did at PayPal related to eBay and how that's similar to what ultimately was experienced at YouTube, right?
Can you enumerate some of those other ones? You've mentioned a few, but these lessons that you pulled out of those experiences, some of them were hard-won lessons, right? Over these years. Say more about those. From the PayPal era.
Yeah, so I think I think that during that period, it was I think I was so lucky to have worked at PayPal for many reasons, but I think one of them that ended up being, I think, just so important to me when I started YouTube and growing from a one-person engineer to an engineering team, and it continued to grow to multiple levels of a team, was that PayPal went from, I was able to see what it was like to be a company with less than 20, a staff of 20, with a very small engineering team. I was able to see that grow, and you started seeing customer service. You started seeing people complaining that certain things weren't working. You started having QA. You started having live issues. You started seeing that all this ease in fundraising all of a sudden just became, it just starved, and you have to find ways to be able to get around that. You see this conflict between, look, in order for PayPal to succeed, it needed to be able to emit itself on eBay, but at the same time, there's no, eBay doesn't want, so there was this conflict between survival of PayPal and almost using the users as the backup to say, to be the support, to say, look, we are eBay users, buyers and sellers, but we like and we prefer this service. And so eBay, if you want us to continue to list auctions and purchase and execute auctions, please permit PayPal to operate on eBay. And that was the same thing years later with YouTube and MySpace. And then I think that through that process of going public, the acquisition by eBay, and I think more importantly is this massive growth of the company, it got to the point where I think in the later phases of 2003, 4, 5, but it gradually crawled up there, was that the stages in the pipeline to be able to have an idea in your head, to be able to have that be something that's felt, seen, used by users, just grew to be a lot longer, right? From everywhere from, there'd be phases where the business development team would have this idea about being able to enter into certain markets, into being able to monetize into certain areas that the service was not in. They would work with a product development team. The product development team would have to write these product specs. The product specs would have to have user interface and mock-ups with the user interface department. Then the engineers would be coming in to be able to estimate how long this would potentially take, and because the engineers would be at fault if they don't make those dates, they would generally, add an extra 20%, 25% buffer to those dates. And then after that is done, it gets sent to a QA department. QA department goes through all the testing, sends it back to the engineers. If there's a bug and it goes into the cycle, eventually it gets released by these release engineers if there's any more problems. And so what used to be a single engineer with an idea that would be able to get it out, and there's a chance that there may be mistakes, there's a chance that there may be a bug out there, but I think in creating this pipeline, especially in a pipeline where each of the stages along this pipeline are not really communicating, and not really, by the time it gets to this QA phase, they don't really understand why they were doing this in the first place. How does this actually benefit PayPal or eBay? And so I think that just graduated over a period of time. That just became more and more. And throughout this whole phase, I think it was always kind of mentally keeping notes as to, if I were to ever start a company, I would just kill this QA department. I don't see I think it was a great thing when it was just the engineers that had to almost be their self QA. So once they release something, they're responsible for it. And if it doesn't work, they have to be held accountable, not this QA department that's held accountable. There was a lot of finger pointing if every one of the groups are not collaborating and working together in unison, because if something goes wrong, it's the QA department is touching and saying the engineers are saying, but that's what was written. And then because I think there's so much with the time commitment. It was about making those dates rather than getting something out quickly, that it almost became a conflict between what the company really wanted, is to be able to release these features in a quick way. But because I think the engineers, nobody really wanted to be at blame for being late on their estimates. And so all these estimates just ended up being far larger than what they would have been just even years ago with a far smaller team. So anyway, as we went through this phase of growth, there was a lot of just mental notes that I started making as to, this definitely works, and if I were to do something, this definitely would not work, and I would want to change it. And even fast forwarding, I think, to the YouTube days when we started the company, I think that I'm sure I had staff that was thinking the same thing about what I did, which is to say, if I were to start a company, I would not do what Steve did, and I would do this differently. But I think that's, in a way, that's the culture and the evolution of Silicon Valley itself, and that's how it differentiates itself from maybe some of the other parts of the world that's trying to see what's different about Silicon Valley versus what they're doing, is that through this evolutionary process, I still think that many of the folks that are starting companies, they're just wearing different hats and different key cards, but they are using the same skills that they've learned from all the previous companies that they've worked at to be able to apply it to their new jobs. And so I think that that was important for me to have spent those years at PayPal and through that entire spectrum of time. And I think that without that, I would have never been, even if I had the idea for YouTube, I never would have been able to take that first step into building it.
Just while we're talking about a few other lessons, there's something else I want to ask you about, which is you had this sort of unprecedented experience of having the dot-com boom and then bust also in the middle of all this. How did you make sense of all of that?
I think the dot-com boom was a little bit outside of the context of what I was doing day to day, in that at the level of the at least in the early phases, right, at the level of the engineering or a engineering team lead, it's hard for me to know how that board meeting went yesterday. It's hard for me to know how that presentation went with the venture capital firms, to know whether or not the check was written, the check was smaller than expected, it was larger than expected. But I think that through that phase, I definitely saw that as my responsibilities grew, it seemed like there was a correlation with the ambition for the company. So one of the largest projects, and probably one of the most educational projects that I had at PayPal, was the last project that I worked on at PayPal. And it was trying to launch PayPal inside China. And so involved with that was translating the product, and at the time you could not transmit cash from outside, from USD into China, and so it almost had to be a different product altogether. I know that because the servers, again, this helped when we were creating YouTube. The servers were all in data centers in the US, and so imagine if somebody inside China wanted to send cash to somebody else in China, it would have to make a transaction that would talk to the servers here in the US, go back, and because it wasn't a single transaction that would that would happen, it would be going back and forth all the time. And we were looking at over 30 seconds to actually make one simple transaction. And then I think for my part, just
What year was that?
this was 2005. And for me, what was helpful to me was to be able to, for the first time, run an engineering team that was over 20 people, and to be able to. It wasn't just an engineering team working on one specific feature. It was, sure, there's China, but it encompasses many aspects of this larger project. So it would be payment services. It would be making sure the translation was working, making sure that in China, there's a lot more restrictions on what you can do with payments, and so making sure that the product was different to adhere to the rules of transactions within China. And I'm happy to have had that experience, because up until that period, I hadn't really had the opportunity to be able to run a team of that size. And again, I think that I learned a lot of things during that time that I later applied when we started YouTube, and as YouTube grew to be multiple engineers.
So also other lessons, these lessons that you were able to pull and look at the threads is very interesting. Were there any lessons around the IPO and acquisition? You mentioned a little bit about the acquisition, but about the IPO process?
I think the IPO process was just crossing a line in the labs that we were running. I mean, it was just it was business as usual. I think the large one was the acquisition by eBay.
Say more, please.
Well, I think when you're going IPO, yes, it's a significant change for the actual company, but it's business as usual for the engineering, for the product. It's nothing is changing. When there's an acquisition, then things can change. The acquisition happened, and immediately, I think, just weeks after, the leaders of the team, the Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, they left the company, and all of a sudden, the sort of the governing decisions were being made by people that we had never worked with from eBay. And I want to say that was also another lesson learned through an acquisition, that you kind of check off boxes. Like, if we were to go through an acquisition, if we were to analyze whether or not the acquiring party is the right fit for YouTube eventually, we learned some of those key lessons during that eBay PayPal acquisition. I think that in a lot of ways, I don't think that acquisition was optimized for PayPal. It was optimized maybe from a sort of business perspective for the individuals. It was not the right thing to do. I think, I don't know how far I should get into how much I disliked the acquisition.
You are free to say whatever you would like to talk about. These are very, I think, pulling back some of the layers and helping tease out lessons is really helpful. So whatever you would like to talk about.
Sure. So eBay's model was really about getting features out, and it was about looking at it from the face of, we are eBay, and eBay is comprised of these teams, and these teams are doing this, and all that's really measured is that the engineering, the design, the product department, all they're doing is creating and meeting the demands of this business development team, to the point where it almost anonymizes the individual contributors. And so they had this sort of metaphor for how their sort of product model would work, and so it was modeled around these trains, and so every train would be a version number, and it almost didn't matter which engineer was working in which train. So if an engineer, so all that really mattered was that the products that were supposed to be slotted to be on this train release, as long as we have the resources to do it, it almost didn't matter as to who was doing the work, as long as this train was released on time. And I think that I think it surfaced as well when it came to this integration between PayPal and eBay. It almost was all of PayPal was responsible for meeting these numbers. These key metrics are determined, decided before, and it's the kind of the gauge on whether or not PayPal was accomplishing what it's supposed to do is just meet these numbers. And I think that through that acquisition period, we as a sort of an individual contributor, as an engineer, I just didn't feel like I didn't feel really inspired to be working for eBay and PayPal at the time, and that was. I wasn't the only one that felt that way. I think that many of the other engineers, many of the other product team, they were a little bit disappointed that, between these two forces, the sum can be greater than the parts, but it just felt like it wasn't a correct, good fit between the two. And I know that definitely, because of, again, during the YouTube time, most of the engineers that we hired were from PayPal. And so when it came to the acquisition with Google, a lot of them were clamoring that let's not do another PayPal eBay acquisition.
Yeah, let's not do that again, right? It's so painful. Before we leave the PayPal time, it's so important to, as entrepreneurs, thinking about the team, the people that they're going to be collaborating with. That's so important. Choosing who you're going to work with, and the chemistry and the complementary skills. Do you want to describe a little bit about the other people you were working with? You mentioned Max and Peter briefly, but can you say more about?
Yeah. I think the engineering department specifically within PayPal was amazing.
What made it that way?
I think it was amazing because of the sort of the era that it was built. It was one of the very few companies that during that dot-com crash was able to transform and to make the sort of morphing changes to be able to continue to survive. And it was one of the very few companies that was still doing a lot of hiring during that phase. And so some of the best engineers that came out of this entire area, came out of Stanford, came out of Berkeley, came out of Champaign-Urbana or Carnegie Mellon, and some of the best computer science schools all across the nation, if they wanted to come work in Silicon Valley, PayPal was one of the few destinations that they could land at that they would still be able to work in a startup at the time.
Were there, just sorry to interrupt there, but for context, what were the other ones? Just kind of take us back in time. What were other firms that were really had that deep engineering expertise, that were other magnets, just so we can have a sense of that era?
I think that during that time, it was really a coin toss whether or not that company that seemed to be doing so well in 1999, that was receiving so much funding, would make it through year 2000, 2001, and still be alive at the end of 2001. And so I can't really recall many of the companies that started in 1999 that is still alive today. There's the Yahoos and the Googles and the eBays, but a real company that was really started in that 1999 time that was able to make it through and continue to survive with the fundraising that it did. There's only a few of them, and so that's I think, in some ways, that was the fortune of PayPal at the time to have started in '99 and to be able to make the engineering and the product decisions to have survived that period. But I think the award for that was being able to get some of the best engineers that were available to be working that time.
So you ultimately made the decision to leave PayPal, and you want to talk about that decision, and then how you decided, when, why, and why then, and then how you made the decision to go to Facebook.
Yeah, so because I was an early engineer at PayPal, when it eventually went public, the stock options for someone that started in 1999 was valued at with the stock price that it went public at, it was about $1 million, and as a 20-year-old coming from the Midwest to have become a millionaire in the 20s
Wow.
Was beyond my furthest dreams. I at that time, and thinking back upon it now, I can only say it was silly during my mid-20s, but at that time, it was just, I had stopped doing everything that I liked doing. I had stopped playing computer games. I had stopped doing, just spending any time doing anything other than working and programming. And I was always thinking that once I leave PayPal, I would just be able to do all the things that I'd sort of suspended doing. But I think that I'd always like during that time I was thinking that look, if I could. I remember at the PayPal in 2005, I was thinking that you start getting checks for your 401k, I think, when you're 59 and a half years old. I don't know if that's the case still now, but in my 20s. And I was thinking, I'm on a pretty good trajectory here at PayPal. I could, director of engineering, keep going up, and in another 30 years, I don't know what it could have become, but I was on a good trajectory, and making six figures and having $1 million in the bank account, that pretty much fulfilled the dream about coming out to Silicon Valley and having been behind this company that almost transformed the payment services. But I think lingering in the back of my mind was always, I have these ideas, and if I don't do it now, I don't know when I would do it. It's almost similar to, in a way, coming out to Silicon Valley in the first place. Was that, look, if I don't do it now, that opportunity, that window of opportunity may close. I can always go back to time. I could always go back to school. I could always go and find another career job in the Midwest. And that was a similar thought in 2005. Was that, look, if I had an idea, and if I don't do it now, if I don't do it before I get married, if I have kids, I don't think there's going to be another time that I'm going to be able to do it. And that time window was closing. And at the time, starting from 99 to 2005, I had already been at PayPal for a long period. I felt that I learned just about everything that I could really learn from the startup phase, the investment phase, acquisition, and then as the company expanded, to be able to see the cost of what it takes to expand the company. And so starting from about 2005, especially after launching this massive China project, I was thinking, I don't think there's going to be another project that's going to be bigger than China. I don't think that there's anything else that I'm sort of, that is amiss in working for a startup. So I think now is the time to start exploring and doing something else. So similar to moving out to Silicon Valley in the first place, I started re-engaging with Chad to talk about what we wanted to do next. And that started actually in late 2004 that we started having these meetings. And
Are they any others involved with you at those early conversations?
so there was another engineer, Javid, who also came from Champaign-Urbana at the time. We had also worked with and collaborated on a few projects back at PayPal, and so we would get together either at Chet's house, dinners in Palo Alto, and just talk about what we wanted to do next. I think that all of us wanted to do something else, something together. Chad had left PayPal already a few years ago, and we were all kind of around that same age, about 24, 25, 26, and we had all been part of that whole PayPal experience from the very beginning. And I think in a way provided some confidence as to say, look, if we can build this global payment service from a group of 10, 20 people, let's talk about something else that we want to do. I think that some of that confidence is probably artificial in that, look, there's still always going to be it's always going to be difficult to start a company that succeeds. But I think that the confidence just ends up building purely because we went through it once with PayPal. And so I think that for a lot of folks out there that have a great idea, they don't have that confidence to be able to act upon that idea. To be able to say, I know this is a startup idea, but I have a great job right now. I have insurance. I have a great sort of career that's ahead of me. I'm not willing to stop all of that to create a startup. But having gone through, I think, PayPal once, where all of us through different stories somehow ended up in Palo Alto, and not having gone to school here, not having grown up here, all of us ended up here, started on PayPal, and then going through all the different turns, ended up in 2005 to have been the beginning crew that built PayPal. So we started just talking all the time about the different things that we wanted to work on. And at the time, YouTube was still far down the line in terms of the idea. But that was when we first started getting together, this initial group of 3 co-founders of YouTube.
And what kind of ideas were you considering? As you said, YouTube was far down the line. What you were kind of trying on for size, a lot of different ideas.
Yeah, I think that we talked across just about everything that we could think of. It was a lot of spontaneity. It was I think that for me, I think the ideas are always just throughout the day, being more observant about what could be maybe enhanced or optimized if technology was a part of it. So I think maybe just having a shorter amount of patience with everything that you're doing and everything that you get irritated by, seeing if there's a way that technology can be able to make it better. And so that was a lot of thinking when it came to, I remember one project that I always wanted to be able to work on was just given the limited amount of time that we had to be able to read news or read what we're interested in, I always thought that it'd be great to be able to create a better, a sort of information, a news reader that would be customized for your interests. And so I remember building something like that as a mock-up, and it was working for a while. There's another idea that was about, looking at real estate properties and being able to do a virtual tour of different homes without being physically there to walk through the homes. But it's stuff that I would use. It's stuff where I only have a limited amount of time to read news, so this would make it easier to be able to not having to personally go through and say, I'm not interested in this article, I'm not interested in this. What are the ways that you can just show me, if I have 15 minutes, the 15 articles that I would want to read? I was buying a home, and I was looking at some of the properties, and up in San Francisco at the time, and I thought it would be great if I could just be able to see all the homes in the area, in the Bay Area, without having to make an appointment and be there in that time window. And so during that time when we were meeting, it was a lot about these discussions, and it was really still high level as to what do you think about this idea, and everybody would contribute.
If we could sort of teleport back in time, can you just describe one of those conversations? You know, where were you and how did it go? You said you were in Palo Alto at a restaurant, or or somebody's home. You know, this fertile brainstorming where people are trying is really, it's kind of like opening a black box of helping people who are trying to learn from you understand how do you explore ideas and how do you select them. So if you could just say a little bit more about, what one of those conversations might have been like, and how did you then later decide on what you decided to develop?
Well, I think that it was important to get the three of us always in one room, and just spending the 3 hours just throwing out ideas and somewhat being really respectful of one another. And so I think that it was, here's a list of things, but it was more about working together to kind of evolve or talk about, look, here's an idea that I have about finding homes. Like, Chad, would you ever use this? And I think that whole process, and as we started getting better at it, was trying to figure out what we wanted to do. Was this problem that just something that that I was having? Was this something that the group would also see as being useful for them? But a lot of it was the sort of, we never built anything at that time. It was just purely conversations. And and I think that's it. I mean, I think that it wasn't even just, that wasn't completely new to us in 2005. We've always gotten together and talked about, even when we were full employees at PayPal, and we still were at the time. It was just talking about, was there something else that technology could be able to fix? Was there something else that we shared in a belief that if there was something like this, we would be able to all use it, and to be able to see just other friends and other people using it.
That's so helpful to hear a little bit more detail. So can you point to a time where the sort of germ for YouTube came from this conversation? What was that?
Well, I think so we started having these meetings in late 2004, and there was to rewind the clock a little bit, was that PayPal, during that period, was in Mountain View, and as part of the day, all of us would be building different features, different products, and then we would go out for, we would always go out for coffee during the afternoon. And during that afternoon and in Mountain View, we would also meet just not fellow co-workers and friends from PayPal, but we would be meeting some of the other entrepreneurs in the area, and there were many that were in Mountain View at the time. And so there was a coffee shop, this Dana Street coffee shop, that we would pretty much be every day, and while we were waiting for coffee, we would be talking with others. And somebody that we had met there was Jim Young, who was the co-founder of this website called Hot or Not, and the idea of Hot or Not was you would upload photos of yourself, but as a user, what you would do is you would gauge based on every photo that you would see whether or not the photo represented someone that was hot or not. And so it would, within about 10 minutes, you could actually go through just, with just clicking hot or not, you would be able to go through hundreds of these photos. And so, having talked to Jim at the time, I think it gave us the idea that whether or not we can do something maybe similar to it using videos instead. We wanted to. We started talking about using videos for something, and in the beginning, we never thought the application for videos for what YouTube is today to be a general place to upload any type of content. It was trying to figure out a specific purpose. And so that specific purpose, we started using Hot or Not as an example of can you create Hot or Not using videos instead of photos. So from these meetings, we started talking more about this. And then I remember it was February 14th in 2005. So that was a Valentine's Day. And all three of us were on Valentine's Day in Chad's garage. His dog was there, and the three of us, Javed, Chad, and I were there in that room talking about whether or not we can create a video version of Hot or Not. And
perfect Valentine's activity.
Yeah. And a few of us, there are a few memories from that night. I think that one, we did a Google search after we came up with the name YouTube, you being as a sort of user-generated content, and tube representing a TV. And so it was kind of user-generated to be the person that's creating this content, and you to be the on the other side of it, to be the viewer of this content, and the viewing and the creation is for the TV or something representative of the TV. And when we came up with that name, we did a quick search on Google, and it's hard to believe today, but in 2005, if you did that search for YouTube on Google, 0 results came up. So that night we registered the domain name YouTube. You can still go back and find when the domain was registered. And we started talking about how we were going to build this out. And in about 3 months, we ended up building the initial version of YouTube, but it was always under this idea that it was going to be a dating video site, not what YouTube is today.
So this initial idea that you had for Hot or Not, and so what technically, we've been talking a lot about sort of the business idea and your initial co-founders, but technically when you say you built it out, walk us through those first few months. How did you decide the features and the UI, and say a little bit more about how you decided to, sort of start for your users?
I think with the first version of YouTube, it was, I think there's always the shared needs for just about the sort of mandatory requirements for all websites or all apps out there, right? And so that's everything from just things like registration and forgotten password and being able to send emails out when you share content. But the biggest change with YouTube at the time, and even at the point of release, was one. Any videos viewed in 2005, you needed to have QuickTime Player, you needed to have Real Player, you needed something.
We were talking about that evening, February 14th. Do you mind just telling that story again?
Right, so that night, February 14th, inside Chad's garage, we, a few key things. I think other than it being a dating site. Everything else that became of YouTube when we launched, and I think in some ways what it is today, we talked about, discussed, and came up in that room. So the domain name I said was that we made sure that what we came up as the name for the actual site app was 2 words, you and tube. Tube just being the sort of synonymous with television, and so it's sort of a way to be able to watch content online. And then the you has 2 stanzas. One of them is you being you, the creator of the content, and you being the viewer of the content. And so it meets in the middle, but YouTube would be it's user generated content for other users. And then we made sure that the domain wasn't taken at the time, and we registered the domain on February 14th in 2005. Days after that evening was when we started looking at the technology that became YouTube today. And so there are a few things there that it's hard to believe that before 2005, these things were not possible. It was not possible to watch a video inside a browser across the sort of the various operating systems, from the Mac to the Windows and different version of Windows. It was because of that, it was not possible to be able to embed one of these videos onto your own website, onto at the time a MySpace at the time, and I think the last key thing that we did at YouTube was this natural ability to be able to, without human interaction in between any video that you would upload, whether it's from your your webcam, your digital camera, as soon as you upload it, it would be viewable to anyone that you want to share that with. And so what that involved was this transcoder that was written, which would understand all the different video codecs out there and all the audio codecs out there and the combinations of the two, and being able to transcode that video into a video that was viewable inside the browser. And I think all 3 of those were key to the success of YouTube. I mean, the idea itself was an innovative idea, but to be able to streamline that process, to be able to take any video that you can create from any source and to be able to have that be immediately available for you to share, and also to embed on websites, web pages, and profile pages that you use on other websites. Nobody else was doing that at the time in 2005.
So, as you described them, we really realized how significant that was, proved to be.
Right.
It probably wasn't. Was it just so straightforward? It sounds as if it's straightforward. These 3 things coming together, sort of seamlessly integrated for the user, and was it, or what? How did you experiment or evolve quickly in that early period to pull those features together?
I mean, there were
capabilities.
There was definitely a lot of all-nighters that were pulled to be able to have this all put together in a matter of months, right? But the real key thing was the technology being able to just work with videos. Everything else, again, to be able to register for a user, we've done that all the time with databases, with the ability to be able to, do registration, to be able to share the emails that go out. That's pretty much standard stuff. The real change that we did was with videos, and so that was deep diving for months into how we can embed these videos. The video codec that we ended up using was the only one that was already inside the majority, over 95% of the browsers at the time, and that was using Flash video. And so any video that would be uploaded, we would be able to retranscode that into Flash. And because it's in Flash and because it's embeddable inside a browser, that made things a lot easier for all the other features that we wanted. So as soon as that was uploaded, then we would transcode that video. We would create image stills that you can actually embed onto other sites. You can embed this Flash player onto other sites, and you can, as long as it's on any other site out there, anytime you press the play button, it would be streaming from YouTube. And so all of that was making sure that we could get videos that were uploaded from different devices to be transcoded into a video that was in the Flash codec, and that was it. But that probably took the longest amount of time. There's just a lot of back-end requirements for it, the amount of computational power that's required to be able to do it, the amount of storage that's required to be able to host this, to be able to generate a lot of this on the fly, and just to be able to understand all the different audio codecs and video codecs out there to be able to transcode it to one codec that was usable across all the browsers.
It's really huge, right? And can you say a little bit of, you have this small, tight team.
Right.
Who was doing what for those, those times of intense development?
I think same with probably most startups. It's certainly us at the time. There was no talking of titles or what. It was just bringing together the different sort of specialties and experiences of what we've done before. I think with Chad, I knew it was a good combination because we had worked together for so many years before that. He was the only designer at PayPal. I was mainly responsible for a lot of the user-facing features, and so we had collaborated and worked on many and sort of had a long experience working together already. And so this was more or less just a new product, but we had that relationship. And then coming from Javid and my background, it was mostly on the engineering side. Coming from Chad's background, it's a design side. And where we met up was what the product was going to become and definition of what YouTube is, what YouTube was. And so I think that's that was a key component to building it, was that there's not it was possible to work for 3 days, 4 days almost by ourselves, and then we would meet to be able to talk about, or we would email, we would call to talk about what the actual product was. But then as soon as we talked about what we wanted this product to look like and various parts of what became YouTube, we could always all go home and do our work. And so I think it was probably one of the most during that time, with such a small team, we were able to be very efficient with our productivity, and still be synchronized on what we were trying to build.
It's really amazing. So you chose a name, you got the domain. When did you incorporate? When did your first when did the site go live? What were some of those kind of benchmarks along the way?
Well, I know that it was from February to May. May was when we launched the dating site, this video dating site. In between that time, Google Video had come out as well, and I remember it was around April of 2005 where we had a meeting, not about the product, but discussing whether or not we should give up, because we would be competing, and not directly, but competing with Google Video, and we were so close to just releasing it. So we decided, let's just get this out there and we'll see how it does.
What were your biggest concerns, just as you were thinking about giving up?
I think that just this, I think doing anything to compete with in a space that Google has focused its engineering team and its product team into was intimidating, right? And so here's a group of 3 people that's building something, and especially something that had such high requirements for just the back end side of things, to be able to, to be able to pay for all the storage and all the, all the machines, the data centers, all this, the networking, the computational power, and to try to do this on our own credit cards versus what Google was doing, even if we were to build that same exact product, and if it came down just to resources, there would be no way to compete. But again, I think that we just said we're mere weeks away from launching this thing. Even if we're going to be competing with Google, it doesn't make sense if we don't at least get this out there. So that was that was in April that we decided to do that, and then in May we launched the first version of what of the YouTube.com. You can actually visit, and for the first time you would actually see the YouTube website.
First video, was it about a trip to the zoo, or was that an earlier one?
Well, there were. If you were to look at the sort of the database of all the videos, there were hundreds and hundreds of videos that were created prior to the first public video, right? I think that the hardest part about launching YouTube during those days was just trying to get the videos to be synchronized with the video and the audio from all the different codecs out there.
So hard.
And so I remember just creating so many 4-second, 5-second videos of just talking in front of the camera and just trying and testing all the different codecs out there. And I don't remember when that first video that Javed uploaded was, but I think that was one of the first videos that we would want to share with the users of YouTube. But at the time, it was really still supposed to be a dating site. It was it wasn't supposed to receive videos like that. And when we released this video dating site as YouTube, we literally got 0 users, 0 videos uploaded during that whole week. I mean, I looking back again, it should have just been a general video site. I think that it's hard to believe that some prospective dater would sit in front of a webcam and just for a minute talk about who they are and what they're looking for, and and I would say that all the videos would be the same, more or less. It would just be a different person greeting and introducing themselves, and so we really didn't get all the back end was working. Anytime you wanted to upload a video, it would be able to transcode or create the image stills. You can fast forward, you can reverse, you can share the videos, you can embed the videos, but just we weren't getting any videos. So we just
So how did that feel? All this work, all this anticipation, and then no users, no video, nothing uploaded. How did that first day, right? That anticipation, you launch. Nobody.
I think that was almost
day 2, nobody. Day 3, nobody.
In some ways, I think it was probably expected that we were not going to get. I mean, it's nobody knew about the site at the time. We didn't have marketing dollars. We didn't have money to give everybody that signed up $10 to sign up, or $10 to share the accounts. And it's it was relatively difficult to even create a video back then, and almost impossible to be editing and putting the sound effects and then uploading it took time, and then sharing it takes an awful lot of bandwidth relatively to be uploading and viewing this content, and only broadband users really could be the ones that are actually contributing to the site. So the expectation was pretty low that we were going to be getting a lot of content in, and even in those early few months, we were just happy that we were getting 100 views a day, 500 views a day. It's looking at the actual numbers and just looking at the percentage of growth. Now looking back, it's every week it was doubling, right, in terms of views, in terms of the uploaded videos. But doubling back then was from 100 views to 200 views. They always looked, in the absolute sense, pretty small numbers. But if you were to graph that out, it would be something that could easily be looked at now as this was a success from the very, very beginning. But no, we ended up just taking everything on the back end side of YouTube from its first days as a dating site, rebuilding it on only the presentation tier. So no longer sort of hearts; it became stars. And then it was really just, let's take the same concept and generalize it, and that's what YouTube became a week after the launch.
So you had this new insight, a different kind of, the general video instead of
right
dating, and then this incredible journey starts. So walk us through sort of what happened next. As you started to really, you talked about pivoting and, continue to add features and test
right.
and try. Can you say more about that?
I think different from many of the other startups out there, YouTube was not necessarily competing or trying to create a better version of a solution to a problem that already existed at the time of launch or by competitors out there. YouTube didn't really have much competition at that point. YouTube was more about whether or not it was even possible to use the internet as the distribution platform for videos. At the time, still, bandwidth was astronomically priced compared to what it is today, right? And with YouTube, every time you wanted to watch a video, it's fine for the viewer because they're already paying for broadband on a monthly basis, and they're able to stream this content. But for every one of the views on YouTube, it's positive on one side because people are using the website, people are using the app, and people are using it to share and to watch videos. But every time somebody viewed the video, we had to pay for it, and there was no benefit to the growth of the website. It wasn't getting optimized. We just always had to pay the same bills. So in a way, as the website grew, as the number of views grew, we were just spending more and more money. And so it was, in those days, it was just trying to see if it was even possible to be able to use the internet as the distribution rather than using sort of a cable to your house. And so during those early days, it was more about let's try to optimize for everything. The amount of computational power it takes to transcode a video, the amount of power to store the storage of these videos. I mean, the videos are sizable, and every time a video gets uploaded, we would have to find storage for it. We would have to find backups for it. We would have to stream this content anytime somebody wants to view it. And so we didn't have funding at the time. So I think the big thing in those early days was just trying to see if we could serve it, not just if the internet could be the back end for videos.
You were linked at the time, as I recall, with MySpace. Is that right? A lot of the users were using MySpace, right? Kids were using MySpace and then linking.
Yeah.
Who were some of your early users? Kind of the profile, because this was new. This was all new, and discovering who was going to use it for what was part of this brand new phenomenon.
I mean, I think that when YouTube started, it was always trying to find, all right, so what is the real use case here? There's a kind of video bloggers out there that were trying to create blogs using video. There is the case where you have a birthday party and the grandfather takes a video and wants to share it with the family. Yes, but what about a more general use case where you're uploading the video without intention of exactly who's going to be viewing this? It's the whole concept of a more public, potentially viral video. And similar to those days at days at PayPal and eBay again, where PayPal was a service, it provided the ability to be able to send money from one person to the other. But how often do you need to use that service on a day-to-day basis? Not often from my day-to-day routines, but on eBay, they need to do that every time a buyer and a seller needs a transaction, every time the auction ended. So with YouTube, it found that the users on MySpace, a social networking platform, would be the ideal audience for YouTube. It's always, they already shared a lot of photos, and they had the same devices to take videos that took those photos. And so we found out that MySpace users were just using, once they found out that YouTube existed, and once they found out that it was able to embed these videos that they created on their devices, uploaded to YouTube, and be able to, we would have a little copy and paste code that you can just copy it and put it into your Facebook profile or your MySpace profile, and to be able to see that video playing. And it would just look like it's whatever your photo is, and then there's a video that's seamlessly integrated. The only thing that we would put in there would be a YouTube logo when you started, when the video is embedded in there before you hit the play. And as you clicked on that, if you tapped on the video itself, it would bring you back to YouTube. And so that was sort of viral marketing. We didn't have money to be able to do any marketing, but I still think the best form of marketing is this viral marketing, this organic marketing, because it means in a way the users are responsible for the marketing, but it also means that it's a lot more, I think it's a lot more authentic, that it's not an advertising, it's not someone, but it's someone that you actually trust, a friend, a family member that's using this service, and you too would use it. But just like the days with eBay, PayPal, MySpace was not happy with YouTube. And in fact, MySpace probably would have never let YouTube on, but we found a way with the embed code to get around what MySpace permitted. And so for a number of months there, YouTube was being used by more and growing number of users. And I remember and it was this constant battle between the two. MySpace would try to do something that would make it harder, and YouTube would change it, and we would adapt to it. And so for days it would not be possible to embed or watch a video, and then for days it was fine again. And I do remember it was December 26, 27, 28, somewhere right after Christmas on 2005, MySpace completely banned YouTube from being used. And so for that period of time, no matter what, the old videos that you had already uploaded to YouTube, and no new videos could be uploaded to YouTube that could be seen on MySpace. And I think that was a call, again, similar to PayPal and eBay, which was calling out to the users that were using the service. It's not just for the benefit of YouTube as a company, but it was almost calling out to the users. And the reason that they used MySpace was to be able to showcase and to be able to communicate and to be able to interact with their friends. And so videos became a core part of that. And so we essentially just said, look, users, like, contact MySpace, and there was nothing. If MySpace decided that they're not going to listen to what their users wanted, if they just completely went with their own decision and stuck with it, there's nothing that we could have done.
Huge risk. Right?
But I remember that deeply nested in their support pages. I think as you keep winding through the typical support links with the frequently asked questions, down there somewhere in there there's a phone number and an email that they finally revealed to you. If none of these ever help, call this number. And we dug through all of that and just put it on the front page of YouTube, saying if you have any problems with your MySpace videos, contact this number. I don't know how many videos or how many I don't know how many phone calls and how many emails they received, but that was turned around, and not just for the benefit of the users, but it did say that MySpace permitted YouTube to be used in their website.
How long in total was that moratorium, roughly speaking?
Say about 2 days, 3 days. There's a lot of I know that there were a lot of emails that were sent by me that was never responded to on the MySpace side, and we finally put up that phone number, and that made the decision, that made the change.
So, thank you for sharing those details. Well, YouTube was attracting attention because of this incredible growth, up into the rise, exponential growth, not only from MySpace, but from, I think, Saturday Night Live, right? Media. Can you tell us about that? Is it?
Well,
and then also investors too, right? Quickly, Time Warner, Sequoia, and others.
Yeah, so I think that I had money in my bank account, and I had I just moved to San Francisco, and so that was a large mortgage house at the time, and then at the same time paying for my first mortgage is also paying for YouTube out of my own credit card for the first time, and I kind of made a self. I told myself that I'm going to give myself two options. One of them is if 2 years, if whatever I'm working on doesn't work out, then I'm going to go back and maybe go back to eBay, PayPal again. The other thing was if I burned through my cash in my bank account, and I set that to be $100,000. And if I burn through this, then I have no choice. I have to go back. Those days were before that financial round that we closed with the Series A with Sequoia. For some reason, Chad and Java didn't contribute. For some reason, I was the only one that was paying.
How did that happen?
Looking back, I never really thought about it, but that was my credit card. I remember that I just kept asking for increases in that credit card limit, and I didn't know you could. I didn't know you could pay for credit cards. So even if your limit is $6,000, you could pay it multiple times through the month, and so you could, even with the $6,000. I learned a lot about credit cards during those days at YouTube, but I didn't know that it was raised from $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and then they refused to raise my limit anymore. But YouTube was still doing well, and we just had to pay for the servers that we were using. And so I ended up paying for it multiple times through the month. But really, it was coming down to the last month where no matter how well the service was doing, no matter how well YouTube was doing, I just couldn't afford keeping it up. And so, we were starting to bring in some of our old friends from PayPal, and luckily because of the PayPal and the eBay and the IPO, they all had a little bit of they had a little bit in their bank account to be able to work for 6 months, to work for a year without having to demand a salary. And so, again, we were lucky in that area because we were able to grab some of the best engineers that we know from the PayPal days to come together to work at YouTube. But we needed that funding round desperately. There's only so much that you can do on a credit card. There's only so much to do without an office where everybody's kind of working remotely. And so that funding round came from Sequoia Capital. And we knew the partner at Sequoia, Roloff, who was the CFO at PayPal. And then after PayPal, he left to go become a partner at Sequoia. And we talked to a number of sort of VCs in the area, but we were most excited that Sequoia made the offer, just given their past record and given our relationship with Roloff, that we wanted that to be the lead, the VC for the Series A for YouTube.
Others expressed interest, and was it easy or hard for you to make that decision?
I think it was always, I think that I would say that the advice would always be to at least talk to one or two other venture capitalists or investors, just to hear what just to hear what their advice is, what they foresee as the market. But I think more importantly, just to get on that sort of competitive spectrum, like where do these investors feel like what our valuation should be. And so we talked to, and I think the other thing is, if you get a bid from one VC, you can always go to the other one to say, are you sure you don't want to raise what you're bidding? And so we did get a few, we talked to a few other VCs here in Sand Hill Road, but I think in the back of our minds, we always wanted to move forward with Sequoia.
Your pitch, you were a known quantity to Roloff. You had personal connections and had a lot of confidence in the capacity of the team and also this vision, which was already attracting an incredible amount of users. But do you remember what the elements of the pitch were for you at the time, and how did you portray kind of the vision, the market, the growth? At the time, what was your? It's easy to look back and say,
right.
Of course, it turned out this way. But at the time, how did you make the pitch?
I think most startups, if they have the opportunity to be able to pitch someone like Sequoia with its history, it's the sort of heritage behind Sequoia, they would spend a lot of time iterating through the slide deck and making sure that you talk about the potential market, the monetization opportunities, the growth, the product, the team. It was just such a small team at that time that we spent one day, half a day to prepare that deck. It was, there was just so many things that if we didn't take care of the product, the YouTube was going to go down. So we wrote that deck, and it's there was no graphics in it. There was nothing in that deck other than YouTube's idea about being able to share videos, to be able to transcode videos, to be able to upload user-generated content. And the key thing was just, these are our metrics. This is the growth. And there's no question that there was some potential there. I think there's no question that YouTube was doing this idea of YouTube was something that users wanted. I think the bigger questions was, again, coming back to YouTube didn't really have competitors other than itself. I think that it was just whether or not this concept would work using the technologies that were current at the time. And so I remember that deck was just, here's a few metrics, here are a few numbers. And when it came to monetization, it was almost TBD. It was almost, we'll figure this part out later. The opportunities for monetization are always going to be there. We can always put ads, pre-rolls, whatever we wanted in these videos, but we just have to make sure that we can continue to grow as a company with the growth of YouTube itself.
So the pitch was successful. For the record, can you just summarize sort of the the investment, the amount of investment, and that was made in that first series?
Yeah, so it came pretty quickly that you need to come visit again, and so Sequoia doesn't make the deal unless all the partners agree to it, and so we went back twice more to give the same presentation, and pretty quickly came the offer for a $3.5 million investment into in YouTube, and just earlier we also sought out Excel Ventures and talked to them as well, and they came back with a similar a better offer than Sequoia, and then we went back, but it was really compressed of a schedule, and I think that you know, I think that first round, it was, I remember the exact time, but it was just a very small time window to be able to do that. Internally, we all
Was
knew that
weeks?
as soon. Well, was that?
Was it weeks or?
Yeah. I think that it's we really needed just sort of external funding, and we knew that if it could be Sequoia, that would be our top choice. They have all the connections. They had they had connections with other startups. They have connections with the boards of many of the other companies that we would potentially want to partner up with. And so as soon as that offer came in, we took it, and we were able to work out of their offices for a while before we found our own office. We were able to get some of their help for referrals for other areas of the company. So at that time, it was just we just had engineers and one designer, and so all the other areas we didn't have until the deal closed.
This is a great place to end. This is just a gripping story. But did you celebrate? Did you take a pause to celebrate when you got the funding? Was there anything that marked that really significant occasion?
That's a good question. Either we didn't, or maybe we did too much and I don't remember. I don't remember when that deal closed. But I do know that when that deal closes, you don't get the money right away, or for a while, or for weeks. And so, as happy as we were that we had a bank account that was going to get populated with millions of dollars, I was still paying service my own credit card for another month or so. People were still working very hard without a salary, without any paycheck. But I don't remember any party being thrown.
And did you keep your deck, your original pitch deck?
I think that's somewhere out there.
Is it somewhere?
Yeah. I don't have a copy of it, but I know that it's somewhere out there because there are some services that just collects the first drafts or V1s of decks, and I remember seeing that a few years ago.